All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to Good Vibes. I'm Martin Falls. Joining us now is Debbie Cox DeNova. She is our transformation coach. You watch her each week. We come up with topics, we talk about them. Today is very interesting because, Debbie, I've had this conversation with our good friend Coach Gano many times. Of course, he was a Dale Carnegie teacher.
I know this.
And a lot of people go and get Dale Carnegie to either learn how to speak in public or deal with people.
Yes.
Today's topic is a doozy, dealing with difficult people.
Yes.
How difficult is that?
It can be quite difficult. And we all know when I say dealing with difficult people, I'm sure for everyone at home, somebody pops into mind, maybe several somebodies. So before we approach this topic, I want to invite everyone at home to start thinking about and remembering, first of all, that on our worst days, each and every one of us occurs as difficult to someone else. So as we talk about the types of difficult people, at home, evaluate for yourself, what is my Achilles heel? Which one of these might I actually stumble into, not only because it will help you to not come off as difficult to other people, but also so that you can have compassion and understanding, because most people are not trying to be difficult. Most people who are showing up as difficult, it's usually either they're triggered or they don't know where to go, they feel outsmarted, they feel, there's some sort of feeling that's causing them to act from their primal selves, essentially.
Primal, I like that.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
And so we all have that. We all have the capability of doing that. And if you learn these strategies, especially when you're in arguments of sorts with this difficult or toxic people, it will help you to become a more emotionally resilient person, someone who's more rooted and grounded. So it can only actually help you if you approach it from a conscious place. This information comes from Vanessa Van Edwards, who is of Science of People, Tessa West, who wrote a book called Jerks at Work, and Tom Bilyeu of Impact Theory. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is to remember that when we're approaching difficult people, that we should come with a spirit of open-mindedness and generosity. A lot of us, especially we're dealing with somebody we just decided we don't like, we want to make them wrong, we want to maybe control them, we want to dunk on them, basically. We come with an attitude of wanting to prove our point. And what happens then is that the other person senses that, and it actually makes them more difficult. It actually roots them more into their difficult personality. So if it's someone, for example, who doesn't talk a lot and you're trying to pull words out of them, there's something wrong, but I can't tell. The more that you try to get at them, the quieter they become, the more shut down they become. If you're dealing with somebody who's more, combative, same thing. You try to come at them and prove them wrong, it makes them even more combative. So what we want to think about is diffusing. And so I'm going to talk about some strategies for diffusing arguments, for actually coming to resolution with arguments with difficult people, and then just actually being able to reframe difficult people so that you're actually protected.
I laugh because in all of my friend conversations, or including myself, sometimes you go, oh, they're so difficult, and they're going, oh, you're so difficult.
Exactly.
And in my relationships with all my friends and their wives, they go, oh, she's impossible. And then she's going, he's impossible.
That's exactly right. There's always two sides.
You got to identify.
Absolutely. And be able to actually ask yourself, am I being difficult in this situation? And maybe even asking for feedback there. So Vanessa Van Edwards says the first thing to do is identify which kind of difficult person that you're dealing with. They typically fall into 4 different buckets. Okay, so if you want to write this down at home, just so that you know, the first one is downers. Okay, so these are negative Nancys, people who complain a lot, they critique, they judge, right? So and every time you talk to them, it feels like an energy drain. They're just talking about everything that's down, right? So that's the first one, downers. The second one is better thans. Better thans are typically show-offs. They name drop. They always kind of one-up you, right? They typically just feel like, it feels like they know it all in conversations. Passives are typically, they don't have very much of a voice. They may give you one-word answers. If they're upset with you, there's a little bit of passive aggressiveness because they don't want to be overt about it. Super quiet, not a lot of conversation. You're not getting a lot out of them. Those are the ones you're like pulling words out of.
Whatever.
Exactly. And then tanks. Tanks are the combative ones. They get really angry and explosive. They're typically control freaks, super emotional, unpredictable, very bossy, okay? So in each one of these, you probably can recognize somebody in your life who falls into that difficult category.
Or all of them.
Or all of them. But also, again, remember that I'm inviting you at home to identify which one maybe you on your worst day is, you know. So I know that I can become passive, both passive and better than in my worst moments, right? So that's really important kind of for you to check it off yourself so that you have that compassion. And then after that, step 2 is don't try to fix them. So remember, we're coming at this from an understanding. Any one of us, if we feel like someone is trying to fix us or control us in any way, it brings out the worst in us. We're like, you know, that doesn't feel good. So being able to understand and actually be with that this person is the way that they are, and coming with the spirit of understanding and inquiry, like really generously trying to understand, they can feel that. And that is a very diffusing sort of experience for them. Stephen Covey talks about seeking first to understand and then be understood. And if you come at it, if you approach a conversation in that way, where you're actually curiously trying to find out what the other person is experiencing, help me to understand. It feels like, for example, for the passive, right? It feels like you're a little bit frustrated. Can you help me to understand that? And I may be misreading you might want to take some responsibility. I may be misreading this, but it feels like there's a little bit of frustration there. And if there's something that I did, I would really want to address it. Is it possible that whenever I was talking about this, that maybe you misunderstood it as that, right? So helping the passive to sort of to come to the table to be able to talk about something that's on their hearts and minds. So the spirit of generosity and understanding always goes a long way. It helps people to want to cooperate with you and discuss.
Our conversations with Coach Gano. And sometimes when we're talking about difficult subjects, we always get into a laughter kind of thing. Because if you really sit down and think about it, it's humorous.
Yeah.
When people pose as being big or bad, or you'll be at the table and you go, oh man, I was speaking to former President Bill Clinton yesterday, and there's one across the table that always said, well, I was on the phone with George Bush yesterday.
Right.
Okay, where did that pop in?
Right.
Sometimes you have to laugh, don't you?
You do. And if you can keep a tone of laughter and humor, it actually helps to diffuse the energy quite a bit. It's when you get up in your egos, right? And especially when you don't see eye to eye on something and you're trying to actually make some resolution where it's like, I want to go this way, I want to go this way. That's when you usually have the biggest challenges with difficult people. In some instances, the difficult person, you just need to be able to make peace with it, like this is the way this person is, right? And if you can actually root yourself into trying not to, not to change them, allowing them to be who they are, especially if you have to share space and time with them. If you can actually just be with who they are, it will actually protect you from anything that's coming at them. But sometimes you are actually trying to make a decision that's important. Maybe it's a work decision, or maybe it's something about the kids or something about finances, and you can't see eye to eye with that difficult person. That's when conversational skills become very, very important. So it's important first to understand that whether or not you share the same aims. So, because if someone's driving this way and another person is driving that way, then you can have all the conversation you want. It's just not going to work. So being able to say up front, can we agree that we both want this? And coming to an agreement about where you're wanting the conversation to actually go. And then calling out anytime you have maybe like, you're shifting the scope. Sometimes people like to, instead of talking about the subject at hand, they'll drag something from the past and into this conversation.
Totally
right?
not even related.
Not related, and it's actually a diversion tactic because maybe they don't have, they don't feel confident in the conversation.
They don't have the skills to get past where you're at.
Exactly. So it's like rather than that, they take from the past and they've changed the scope of the conversation altogether. So it's scope shifting, right?
By the way, Debbie, did I tell you how nice your hair looks?
Thank you.
Yeah, I just changed the whole scope.
Exactly. But when it's a diversion tactic where when you're feeling confused, right? What are we talking about right now? Kind of like that. And Tom Bilyeu says, call that out. If someone is actually shifting the scope or going all over the place, you can again take responsibility, again, remembering the spirit of generosity and open-mindedness and saying, okay, help me to understand because I'm feeling a little confused. We're talking about this now, and originally we were talking about this. And maybe there's some relevance here that I don't understand. Maybe you can help me understand that. There's a research study that shows that if you ask for somebody's help in anything, they actually tend to like you better. So this actually helps to kind of bring you back to common ground. And also, it sets the tone of if this conversation goes off course, I'm going to call it out. So
but some people offer you help, but really don't want to give it.
No, that's the truth. That's the truth. But once you've set when you start to actually point out the scaffolding of the conversation, basically saying like, it looks like you're aiming this way and I'm aiming this way. Can we get to an agreement about where this conversation is going? Like what resolution we're actually trying to produce here? Or, it looks like we're scope shifting again. Can we sidebar this conversation for another time and actually stick with this conversation? That actually sets a new tone where the person you're talking to actually understands that this is like, we're on the same page here. A really great thing to do is what Tom Bilyeu calls the steel man argument. So I have a perspective and you have a perspective. And typically what happens is that people who are in difficult conversations, they come like this. And so if you can start, the person at home, and you're watching this, if you're the intentional person in the conversation, if you can set aside your opinions for now, or trying to make them wrong or whatever it is, if you can set aside any agenda and actually start to try to understand what they're saying and then generously repeat it back to them. So you're actually paraphrasing. Again, seek first to understand, then be understood. You're actually paraphrasing generously as though it were your argument back to them. Let me see if I understand. You're saying that in this situation, your belief is this and your conflict is this. Is that correct? Once you do that, once they get that you understand and they agree, the walls come down and now they're ready to, now may I speak? So I just want to state my thesis
They're not
real
as
quick.
defensive.
They're not as defensive and they're ready to hear your perspective. Then you can actually determine whether there's a collision of values, because sometimes there's a collision of values, right? If you have a certain set of values and I have a certain set of values, even if we're aiming in the same place, that's going to be problematic.
And that's a tough one.
That's a very tough one. So either typically what has to happen in those instances is that someone has to shift their values or you just can't work together, right? Because if if the values don't meet. But this is how steel man arguments can actually help to get there, to even understand. It's very helpful to understand if someone just doesn't have the same values as you. Let me see if I understand.
Look at partners on the abortion issue who may
Yes.
differ.
Right.
Woo!
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it just always boils down to that set of like values, that my values are this, or my or perspectives too, right? But being able to understand what you're actually dealing with, what are the conflicts in this conversation so that we can actually get to resolution is hugely important. So it's about understanding that we all have valid perspectives. Most of us are not trying to be difficult just for the sake of
And
being
by the
difficult.
way, just for clarity, I never talked to Bill Clinton. So nobody has to email me and one-up me, because
Right.
that's what the show's about. But that's a great topic.
Yeah.
Maybe we ought to extend that more.
We probably should.
You could
There's a lot
probably
to
go
talk
on for
about.
days,
yes.
right?
Yes.
All right, Debbie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Debbie Cox DeNova right here on Good Vibes. We'll take a break. We'll be back with a lot more, so don't go away.